Testing, testing, testing. Got it. You want to go? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
I was just making sure this was on.
Does this one work too? It does.
Hey. It's a good sign.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Hope you didn't party too much last night.
You all get a gold star for showing up this early, so yeah.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. My name's Howard Monroe. Welcome to my adopted hometown. I've been here for 4 years. I'm an anchor and reporter for the local CBS station. I will root for the Eagles as long as they are not playing my Giants, just so you know.
Yeah, well, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I have nothing to say here. Like, yeah, we're just mediocre at best every year.
Right.
But we're getting better, so you never know. I'm Kelsey Thorid. I am also with CBS. I'm a reporter at the CBS station in San Francisco. Thank you all for showing up this morning. We're very excited. So it's going to be a good time. Let me see here. Oh, this is the most important announcement of the morning. They are getting coffee for everyone, so it should be hopefully coming soon, so get excited for that. I know it's early, like we said.
I heard the order was like 5 gallons.
Yeah,
So.
and I might drink all of it. Hey, I went out to the women's dinner last night and to the going out party. I think I saw some of you guys there too. It was a ton of fun. Thank you, everybody, for going to that. I feel like it was a success, and there was a great turnout out there last night. Let me see. I already talked about that. Thank you, guys. I hope you're ready for this morning's discussion. We're going to be talking about truth, racial healing, transformation. It's going to be a really important conversation, and we're excited for our panelists to be here.
Yeah, we got some trivia, though, for you guys real quick. First question. Just raise your hand if you know it. Come up, we'll get you a bag. You can take a picture, be some Philly swag. Hopefully it's a roast pork sandwich, of course. First, Temple University graduate Edith Windsor. She was the lead plaintiff in the Supreme Court case that overturned what controversial law?
You can scream it out if you know.
Yes, who said that? There you go.
Winner. You have the prize. Do you want to?
do.
Do you want to come up and get a prize? Okay, we got one more question for you guys. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see if you guys can get this one. That one I feel like was a little easy. This one might be a little harder. Okay, so Giovanni's Room opened in the early 1970s and is one of the country's oldest LGBTQ plus what? Oh, well, that was too many winners. I thought that would be a harder one. I don't know how many prizes you have in there, but whoever first come, first serve. Yeah.
Who wants it? There you go. Come on up, get your prize.
You deserve it. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Giovanni's is right down the street on 11th Street, I believe, 12th Street.
What is that? Like,
What'd you get?
What are the prizes? Oh, that's cool.
Sure. All right. This gentleman over here got a notepad, so.
Oh.
All those notes that you guys need to take.
Fancy.
All right, shall we get to the awards?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. So, and now for this morning's Excellence in Journalism Award presentation. When we announce your name, please come on up. We'll applaud you, everyone in here, and then also you'll get your hardware, you'll get your photo with President Ken Miguel. Now, our first award for excellence in long-form journalism, it goes to Philadelphian, of course, Ernest Owens, for his Rolling Stone piece. Ernest, he wrote, Jussie Smollett wanted to be a hero. Instead, he destroyed his career. The judges, they praised the work as something that both delivers context and content, as well as writers' own connection to Smollett. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Woohoo, congrats. Okay, the next award is for excellence in HIV/AIDS coverage, and it goes to Jordan Gonzalez for his piece in Time Magazine, A Positive HIV Test Shattered His Dreams of Serving in the U.S. Army, and now he's suing. Congrats, Jordan. Now, the judges said that it was Through the story of a person blocked from living his dream due to his HIV diagnosis, this piece offered a clear snapshot of how discriminatory policies are impacting people living with HIV. Congrats, Jordan.
Congrats. Our final award in excellence in sports writing, and the award goes to a familiar name, multiple award winner Nico Lang, for his HuffPost piece, "These states had few, if any, trans student athletes. They passed sports bans anyway." Congratulations. One of the judges remarked that what I really liked about Nico's approach is that it was more than just a roundup of states that had passed trans sports bans. It was a brilliant accountability piece. Congratulations, Nico.
Now, we also had a number of award winners who couldn't be with us today, this morning. They're on the screen right now. So they include award winners for travel writing, student journalism, queer people of color coverage, and coverage for international religion and theater. Congratulations to all of those winners. Let's give them a round of applause, guys.
And before we get started, we want to make sure that you're looking at your convention app, and you will see that there are some great breakout sessions coming up today. Today, while you lunch, you will get your own. You get lunch on your own. Once again, there's a QPOC brown bag in Parlor 415, and a Buy Plus brown bag meetup is in Parlor 413. Grab your lunch and bring it there. Meet your colleagues.
And then don't forget, guys, at 5:15, there's the breakout featuring our Connect Student Journalism Project class of 2023. And they will be showcasing what they've been working on all week. So that's exciting. That's very cool.
And finally, join us for the diversity reception. It's at 6:30, where you'll honor our partners in diversity organization that leads directly into your closing reception here in the Regency Ballroom, where we'll honor our 2023 Hall of Fame inductees and also our Journalist of the Year and Sarah Pettit Award for LGBTQ+ Journalist of the Year. All right, and now we're going to get up to our plenary session this morning. I know we've all been waiting for. It's called Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, How Healing Through Storytelling Changes Individuals, Communities, and Newsrooms. It's a conversation with Atlanta Journal-Constitution Managing Editor and former NLGJA President Sharif Durms. Also, and as well as Ken Lemon, President of NABJ, David Cordero, Region 1 Director for NAHJ, and also Carla Thompson Patton from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Welcome.
Welcome to our town hall on the National Day of Racial Healing, an event created 6 years ago by our sponsor, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
Muy buenas noches y gracias a todos por acompañarnos en este Día Nacional de Sanación Racial.
The Kellogg Foundation is joining forces with the NBC Universal News Group on an editorial collaboration focused on racial equity and healing, sponsored by the foundation.
Racial equity is about the transformation that needs to take place, but healing is the path by which you get there.
Join us over the next few weeks as my colleagues here at NBC News travel to 4 cities to meet with the incredible people who are working tirelessly to change the narrative.
It is not enough to say I'm not a racist. It's not enough to say I want healing.
Racial healing is this awareness of collective responsibility and showing up.
We might not have a title, it's still our land because we're indigenous to this country.
There's still a lot of healing to be done, but we've come a long way.
We're highlighting one school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They are working tirelessly to heal the next generation of Native American students.
Healing means that you see your ancestors and the plight they had and try to understand why it's important to remember their struggles.
Hoy es el día en que todos podemos comenzar a dar nuestros primeros pasos para continuar la lucha y la marcha por la justicia que hicieron el Dr. King y César Chávez.
En estas conversaciones siempre debemos que centrar el amor de nosotros y de nuestra humanidad.
A lot of people think that Asian Americans and API communities at large are doing better than most. And I think that is such a harmful rhetoric.
We deny our children truth, and they love truth. They desire truth.
who does the narrative benefit? And when you question that, then you begin to realize that there are powerful interests that don't want us to understand that history, that don't want us to understand our common struggle.
We are in a dire situation right now, and town halls like this are critical to bring this attention to all.
Thank you to the Kellogg Foundation for sponsoring this panel, and I want to thank all of you again for showing up this early in the morning. I know how long the night out usually goes, and to have a full house for this conversation speaks to the topic and to your dedication to having this conversation, so thank you. Let's just jump in and want to start with David and Ken talking about this issue. So we are more than 3 years past the quote-unquote reckoning for our industry, in which leaders supposedly realized the challenges that they had placed in terms of having diverse leadership and diverse thought in our content. And I'm wondering, I want your assessment of the state of the reckoning more than 3 years after George Floyd. Dave, what's your thought?
Still so much work to do, still. So in terms of Newsroom, for example, the leaders on Newsroom, the managers on Newsroom need to make sure that their teams, for example, represent their communities. Okay, so let me do this disclaimer. My first language is Spanish, so sometimes I feel like I'm translating at the same time I'm talking to you. We need more equity inside our newsroom. We need to make sure we have more Latinos in our newsroom. We need to make sure we have more people of color in our newsroom, and also we need more safe spaces for our LGBTQ community and journalists in our newsroom. So 3 years after George Floyd, yeah, so there are a lot of work that have to be done. So that situation just portrayed reality that we are living on, and push Newsroom to do managers on Newsroom to work around that, but there are like so many spaces that still they have the representation that we all need in our newsroom and our communities. So when we are covering stories, the public also need to see themselves represented in the team of journalists in Newsroom, and that is not happening enough yet.
We'll certainly talk more about leadership in newsrooms. Ken, you just became president of the National Association of Black Journalists. You've been in leadership of NABJ. Before that, during this reckoning, so what is your state of the union in terms of 3 years after George Floyd?
So I think for a lot of people, there was always this fear. A lot of people who were black, at least looking, there was this fear that we're moving, and we're moving in the right direction. But I know somebody's willing to pull it back and wanting to pull it back and waiting for that opportunity to pull it back. We haven't seen a full pullback yet, but it's starting to get to that point. And it reminds me of putting together a jigsaw puzzle, right? When you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle, the first pieces are always easiest. And you're sitting there and you're working it, you can tell the edges and you can tell this and you can tell that. but you don't quite yet see the picture until you get to the hardest part. The loose ends are the hardest part. And I think we got close to the place during George Floyd right after where we could start to see that, the movement of people into executive positions, into management positions, into newsroom leadership positions, and the conversations on air. And I think we're at that spot now where it's just getting a little bit difficult to see the image without holding the box on the front of it. And the concern from a lot of people that we're starting to hear now is that we're on the edge of that place where people want to pull that image back and that we take away. And we're seeing it now in politics, we're seeing it in education, we're seeing a move, and we're starting to hear a little bit more whispers that we heard pre-2020.
All right, we'll certainly talk more about that. Carla, perhaps the Kellogg Foundation looks at it through that lens, but I know that the Kellogg Foundation assesses things through a slightly different lens, which is how are the children. So why don't you tell us your thoughts on why Kellogg looks at things through that lens, and also give us an assessment. How are the children, and what is the state of things?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, you really did party last night. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right. So, you know, Carla Thompson Payton, she, her. And the Kellogg Foundation, in its 90-plus years of existence, has always centered on children because we believe that children are the heart of every single community. And we know that children are not only about today, but they're also about tomorrow. And so for us, when we talk about children, we're centering children with the realization that children are in families and families are within communities. And in order for us to impact the ecosystem of children, we need to think about all of those, both from a grassroots local level, but also from a systemic change level. And so for us, we start every conversation with how are the children? And we know that the children have not been doing as well as they can be doing. If you think about what the pandemic wreaked havoc on educational outcomes, and we knew that before the pandemic, that children, particularly children of color in poor neighborhoods and communities, were not the same sort of high quality services as their counterparts. But we also knew that children are our best opportunity for success. And so during the pandemic, we were hopeful that with the greater awareness of racial inequities, that the greater awareness that not every community would survive the pandemic in the same way, with the greater understanding of racial injustice and the longevity of racial injustice, and the greater understanding of economic disadvantage, that this would be the galvanizing support to help us move forward in a new and unique way. We all know that that did not work out quite as well for the past few months of various legislative and local challenges around even acknowledging that there's inequities. And so for us, when we say how are the children, we are really committed to saying what can we do around not only elevating the language of racial equity and elevating the lived history and stories of children in their communities, but also having solutions around how you can change behaviors and practices and language in order to have a better tomorrow. So for us, when we say how are the children, it's not just how are the children today, but how will the children be for the next decade and the decades ahead.
Thank you for those thoughts. Now, first of all, I just want to mention there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of questions, so get your thoughts percolating. We'll call out for that a little bit later, but I want to dig in a little bit on some of the discussion that you've already prompted. So one of the potential solutions that was proposed after George Floyd was to have different leadership of organizations that more reflected the communities that weren't represented in that leadership. So people who were in those positions were saying, we need more diversity in leadership. Let's dig in even more detail on how that has gone. Ken, do you have thoughts on that? You've been dealing with that with stations and with traditional newspaper organizations.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen?
Well, the interesting thing is right after George Floyd, there was a push. And we saw roughly for about a year, headline felt like every couple of weeks or so of people being promoted to a position, people being promoted to news director, people being promoted to general manager, lots of positions being filled. I remember as we were going through that whole process and we got near the end of that year, entities would come to me and say, hey, do you have any ideas for, I'm looking for a news director, I'm looking for an assistant news director, I'm looking for this. And I would talk to some of the people that I generally talked to in my capacity at that time as VP of broadcast. I would talk to them about certain individuals. And I would hear people say, no. And I'd say, wait, this person's doing great work where they are now. They're ready. They're certainly deserving of an opportunity for promotion. And what I began to learn is that some of those individuals who saw that first group, that first wave go through, understood one thing. People were being elevated to positions, but they weren't necessarily being supported when they got there. They would walk into a newsroom in a culture that was different. And, you know, cultures don't have to be foreign to be different. They just have to be uniquely that. And you have to process your way through. But there was no one there to support them into that position, to orient them into that position. They were just thrust in a position. And the typical people who are normally the GMs and news directors I was talking to about who is ready for this position, they didn't want to put their mentees up in a position where they were almost set up to fail. And so the secret behind that is that we did not hear that there were a lot of people who were elevated, but not supported. And we begin to learn that. And then that's when you understand, oh, this feels like window dressing. This feels like, let me fill this position. And it almost felt like a race to not be Chauvin. You know, I want to prove that I'm not Chauvin. Look at this. We've got this individual in this position. But behind the scenes, you weren't helping them out and you weren't supporting them. And so other people needed to step in a heavier role in that mentor position, and they didn't want to put their mentees back in a position like that.
Yeah, I certainly know from experience. For anyone who knows my career since the pandemic, I've been bouncing around a little bit, but in some leadership positions. And so I've had not only the opportunity of my experience, but the opportunity to talk to other leaders of color who've been put in these positions. The term it gets lonely at the top comes up a lot because of the lack of support, the assumed idea that we have been brought up in the same system that white cisgender leaders have been brought up in, right? And so that we would somehow know all of these things that we have been excluded from, even though we weren't given those opportunities, and therefore instinctually know how to lead rooms. And of course, you also know that there are people in those rooms who want to see you fail in a different way than they have with leaders who have been there before. And so it creates additional challenges and hurdles that I think these organizations weren't prepared for, and in some ways still aren't prepared for now. David, what thoughts do you have?
I will add that this kind of assessment, most of the time, we're watching, for example, the big media stations and how are their leaders and how they react, but we also need to make this kind of assessment in regional and local news media and station, and what is the situation there. And also, it's not just to have people of colors in leaderships, but we also need to make the assessment on the editorial decisions in those newsroom and stations. For example, I still see a lot of even when they have people of color in leadership positions, but they still use, for example, certain kind of image or photos to portray bad situations. And for example, in Puerto Rico, where I work, I remember during the 2020, the worst year of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have a situation that when a media was talking about COVID-19 pandemic, they use people of color pictures to portray some kind of bad situation around COVID-19 pandemic. And also the government, the health department, in a campaign, they use people of color on their figure to portray some of the bad things around COVID-19 also. And these are like the kind of situation that not always got, you know, a lot of attention, national attention, but these are the kind of situation that we are like confronting every day in newsroom and stations in a local and regional level.
Yeah, I was going to say, you must see this. This is a way to try to heal to heal issues, and you must see it not work.
Yeah.
I presume.
So,
what do you see?
We tell folks that racial equity and healing is a journey. Representation is the first step. Individual agency and collective agency needs to happen. An authorizing environment needs to exist, and authority and accountability also needs to exist. And so when many folks come to us, we've been an anti-racist organization since 2007, when our board said we will have to live differently and represent the communities in which we serve through our philanthropic investments. And for us, we recognize that there will never be a time, even though we think about racial equity and racial healing in every single aspect of what we're doing. Our board represents the communities that we serve, our senior leadership and our staff represent it, our grant making represent it, but we know that it's a journey and we will never be at a point where we say we've arrived. But what we will do is continue to open the conversation and recognize that there's ways in which we can all work together. And so when we talk to folks around what is that racial healing journey, representation is the easiest step. We push folks to say, what happens beyond representation? What are the authority figures the authority that folks have? What's the budget attached to it? What's the long-term strategic plan? What's the accountability measures that you have in place? How are you continuing to raise these conversations in every single conversation that you have, for every story that you tell, for every piece that you write, for every conversation that you engage in? Where are the ways in which you do that? And so for us, while we recognize that equity sometimes is hard, we also say it's also the human connection factor. It's how we see each other as individuals and how we honor each other in the conversation. So we put forward a number of tools that help people engage in conversations. So we have a racial equity conversation toolkit. We put out a piece on the business case for racial equity. We have the National Day of Racial Healing, where we have conversations around how you can engage in authentic storytelling and narrative change in order for folks to begin to remove the bias from the conversation and really think about the thing that keeps us connected all together.
So Carla, perhaps you could teach us. When you look at other organizations, where do they fail?
It's not a matter of failure. So there's no win and there's no success. It's really around, how does this become part of the DNA, the ethos of your organization? How do you keep this conversation going? Because let's be very clear. It could be race today, it's sexual identity and orientation tomorrow, it's gender the day after. Someone will always have some conversation that others another community. And so recognizing that it doesn't just cease, but there's an ability for us to come together and try to diminish the times in which we other people, and that we begin to think about what's that human connection. And so for us, it's having the conversation, having the courageous conversations, understanding that your point of view is not the only point of view, and then really recognizing when is you as an individual are coming from a place from bias versus when you're having a conversation that has a different viewpoint, how do you open yourself up to at least hear it, rather than form your own opinion? And so it's practices that we tell people they need to have in the day-to-day living and existence. It shouldn't just show up at work. It needs to show up at home. It needs to show up in school. It needs to be the conversations when you see injustice happening. How are you addressing that? And so we're trying to get folks to recognize that this is a lifelong pursuit. It's not a moment in time.
That makes sense. And both you and Ken have brought up the issue of budgets. In the history of our organization, in LGJ, the Association of LGBTQ+ Journalists, I'm sure a lot of people in the room can remember in the early 2000s the push and progress that was made. In ABJ, you would see people going around saying, diversity, no excuses, and had budgets for that. And of course, when the Great Recession hit, then all of that got pulled back. And with George Floyd, another effort at that. And as Ken, you hinted at, there may be a fear that those budgets are going away, and therefore that support is going to go away. I mean, Ken, tell me about the conversations you're having about that.
So this year, and I did a lot of my work as VP of broadcast. I did a lot of forecasting, and coming into roughly, I guess it was December of last year, November of last year, we heard a lot of people forecasting about what the second half of this year would look like financially for them. And that worried me because the fear was of recession. And the fear was if we get into recession, then you're gonna tighten budgets. And the first thing, and one of the things that we saw happening, even in the wake of the racial reckoning, was DEI positions being cut and teams being cut. And so the fear is, and it often is for black folks, is that, the old saying is that when we as general people get a cold, black people get the flu. And that happens often when you look at employment. Whenever there are employment cuts, oftentimes one of the concerns is that it most adversely affects black people. And so I was really concerned as we walked into that. And that concern hasn't gone away. It didn't turn out that we went into a recession. We did fairly well. People didn't have to make major cuts. They were positioning themselves to slash across the board. But that investment of money, as you so eloquently put, also time is the interesting thing, because when you're looking at shorter staffs, and all of us probably, if you're in a newsroom, you probably know that your staff is altered or probably shrunk somewhat. The easiest thing to do is to shift people away from these stories that impact the community, that empower people to speak and to share their ideas and to share their position, to move away from that and then push towards the daily and the stronger daily and the other things that they think will generally be sellable or interesting to people everywhere. And so this coming year, I'm forecasting again, and I'm looking, usually revenue goes up for media during a presidential election year, an election cycle, but the year after is when they fall again. And then that's when budgets are impacted, and that's when the concern comes, and that's when the shifting of positions and people away from certain areas becomes a concern. And so we're always watching that, and because we need to be ahead of the game on that. We need to understand how that impacts our folks, and not only for an advocacy position to fight for, but also to support those people in those positions, because oftentimes no one else will.
Let's speak about another way that news organizations have tried to tackle this issue, and that is the role of allies. As a newsroom leader, I have had white reporters come to me and say, I'm not the appropriate person to cover this topic. We need to find someone else to cover the topic. And I look around the room, and I'm like, but everybody white here, so somebody has to cover it, right? And the fear to misstep is...
I feel like you should be a panelist. I mean, I'm listening. I feel like you should be a panelist.
Get my little commentary in.
Yes. I'm loving this.
So what are you telling those white people or cisgender people, about how we address these topics in legacy newsrooms where that diversity isn't there yet?
So it's real tricky, right? It's tricky from the aspect of it needs to be as important to you as it is to me. So you need to be out there covering it, but then there's also that thing that says, I understand the nuances of this. Like, this is my community. This is the community when I grew up. This is where I came to town. This is the group that I met with. These are the people I hung up with. I remember coming into my town, Gastonia, and I loved playing basketball and then going to the gym that nobody else would go to. That's now a pickleball court, but going into the gym that nobody else would go to, playing with the young men and everybody else, because they look like my son to me. They look like my nephews to me. And so it's difficult, but what I tell them is, number one, I explain the importance of it. I explain the importance not only of of us covering these stories, but us covering the people. Because the saddest thing that happens is that we cover these stories, and these stories become the ultimate way that we introduce people of color to our community. But we know there are people of color out there who are doctors, lawyers. We know they're experts. We know they're professors. We know they're economists, but we don't see them. And so the importance of integrating them into our stories, and that doesn't necessarily take a black person to do it. It just takes somebody who thinks, why aren't we at this college asking this person? We always go to this college and ask this person for an interview on economics. Why aren't we talking to this doctor who is just as involved and just as engaged? Why aren't we talking to those people? And so when I talk to them, I talk to them about, okay, yeah, it may be that covering the community might be good for me to do, but that's not the only time that black faces should show up. And I shouldn't be the only one who knows those people in those areas. Let me share a list with you. Let me help you out so that you can see. Let me open your eyes to what's out there, and then let me encourage you to keep looking for those individuals who can help make a difference in those stories.
Yeah, I know one thing that I have told reporters is, hey, you're a great investigative reporter. You're a great politics reporter. All you have to do is shift the lens of how you're looking at your stories. Do your great reporting focused on neighborhoods where the bill is going to affect the neighborhood instead of focused on the people trying to pass the legislation. And do that work. And I'm sorry that the assignment is harder than it is if you're just walking around the legislative building and talking to the sources that you've already developed. But you're a reporter who is capable of doing that, and therefore you need the time and to spend the time thinking in order to do that. But while our newsroom isn't as diverse as it needs to be, you need to be doing that work because that work needs to be done for this community.
Allyship is extremely important, and I think one of the things that we've learned with our relationship with NBC Universal is that authentic community engagement is even more important. And so part of our relationship is introducing the newsroom to communities that we serve, not just in moments of crisis, but in moments so that you can understand their lived experience. And so, for instance, in our beginning of our engagement, we brought some folks and introduced them to some of our grantees in Buffalo. And they were able to hear lived stories around folks who lived in Buffalo, their education, their hopes and aspirations for their children. And so when that tragic situation happened in Buffalo, it wasn't them going in to just talk about that tragic situation, but also going to talk to community members around, what does this mean for you today? How is this impacting you? And because they already had established relationship, there was a level of trust where folks could have really honest, authentic conversations. And so what we encourage our partners in media to do is to build those relationships way before a tragic situation happens, because as we all know, tragedy is not the thing that should be bringing us together. That's the thing where we should be offering support. And so really just trying to figure out how we can leverage our partnerships as a philanthropic organization to bring and leverage the voices of community, and then to help folks meet folks that they don't typically talk to or typically have access to. And because we're a trusted partner, communities are more willing to have a conversation that they may not want to have with someone they consider an outsider. And so doing the work beforehand and not waiting until the situation happens is incredibly important.
And I will add that it's just not, conversation, but also education. Yes. in the newsroom, because we as a journalist are also people that are part of the society and part of the system. And when we talk about racism on a systematic way, we also commit microaggressions, sometimes even without have any conscious of that. So one of the things that we on the INAHJ are trying to do is have education focus on how journalists can identify those microaggressions and how can identify how also they commit those microaggressions, sometimes without being conscious of that. So when you recognize that microaggressions, you can also address that situation on your stories. And that education should start like very early, as early as possible, not just when you are a professional journalist in the newsroom. So in the universities with the students, for example, and in October, for example, we're gonna have a training for around 100 journalism students in Puerto Rico, and one of the sessions it's going to be about how to identify those microaggressions and techniques to have a fair and equity vision on your stories as a journalist.
All right, so a mixed bag for legacy organizations that are trying to deal with this work, and I'm glad we're talking about some of the tools that they can use to do a better job of it. We all know some black folks, some trans folks ain't waiting for all that, and that folks are creating our own media. And I'm wondering about your thoughts about the state of what that new media landscape looks like, whether those new players should play with legacy media and in what way, or whether that shouldn't be the focus at all of what these new organizations are doing. I mean, Ken, you could probably speak to some of the efforts NABJ is doing in this space and what the thinking is.
And more than NABJ is what we're seeing pop up, and that is we're seeing these community news pop up in news deserts. And what's happening is that more and more as newsrooms shrink, there are areas that aren't covered or communities that aren't as adequately covered. And the interesting thing is seeing these young journalists pop in and fill those holes. I remember talking to one young journalist that I met in college, and he was just doing this amazing thing on social media that I'd never seen done before. And he came to me and he says, "What do I need to change?" And I said, "Don't change anything, because what you're doing is so unique and so strong, it'll sell, it'll work. What you need to do is just keep doing it," because what he did was fact-based, but it was on social media in this way that I hadn't seen before. And interestingly, he walks out of college and he ends up at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And he came up to me and he said, he gave me a big hug and said, "Thank you for supporting me even when I was doing this, and I'm doing social here." And I said, "No, that's just identifying the fact that you're feeling a need that hasn't been met yet." So what I do like that I'm seeing is that we're seeing these groups, the Tribe and the Kansas City Defender, stepping in and filling those areas that aren't filled. And my encouragement to them would be that sometimes the content, the idea that you can partner with somebody and you can build more content is attractive, but stay true to who you are. You don't necessarily have to chase the content. The people don't always come to you because of what the legacy media are doing. If they wanted that, they would be with the legacy media. Keep doing what you're doing because it is unique, because it is different, because it is strong, because it fills a need. And so my encouragement to those people who are popping in, and there are not enough of them, let me say that, there are not enough of them popping into those spaces, is to make sure that you uniquely identify yourself in that space. You know, I tell mentees, don't mimic what I do. If you watch me, that's fine. Don't mimic what I do, because I'll always be a better candidate for a job than you. Because if you're imitating me, then I'm the better me than you. But do you so well that people say, "That's what I need." And that's what I hope that these media who are coming in and filling these spaces will continue to do, because it's needed, it's necessary.
Yeah, I think one thing, you know, I lived in Atlanta and moved out in 2020 for an opportunity, and moved back to Atlanta in June. And just seeing the change in the media landscape, seeing the change of the focus in the newsroom of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, we're hiring, by the way, seeing the change in the fact that the publisher is paying attention to what journalists are saying on TikTok, and I'm calling them journalists for a reason, right? Paying attention to what Capital B is doing in a way that wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. Because everyone is small enough that we just need to work together in order to serve a community. You know, no one news organization is gonna do it all. and never did really, but at least we thought we were doing it all. But working together is one way to serve the community better. And as a legacy organization, in order to survive, in order to A, get journalists to work in a legacy organization, and B, in order to get any kind of audience to pay attention to us, we have to learn lessons from how those audiences speak. I remember, I've been inspired my entire career. I remember back in college reading the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina, and saying, this is amazing journalism. I want to talk to my friends about it, and I can't talk about it in the way that the lead is written in the newspaper. I have to talk about it differently if I want to engage them. And that is the way that these emerging journalists are doing their work. They're talking about the journalism in a different way and in an authentic way. And we need to encourage that in a way that we're not doing as an industry as a whole in order to survive. What thoughts do you have on this emerging media?
There's all this emerging media. It's happening. Very fast. So again, we need to have more education, like constantly. For example, how we can integrate these new ways of communicate and share the stories in our newsroom. For example, now we have artificial intelligence. We have that like a few years ago, but this year we have a lot of conversation about how to integrate artificial intelligence in our newsroom. It's happened the same with the social media and other ways of communication and technologies. So yeah, we need to have this conversation, but also focus on topics on the stories. How to use these technologies and new ways of communication, but at the same time thinking on the kind of stories that we are covering and how we can integrate both the editorial side in combination with these technologies and new ways of communication.
Carla, do you have thoughts on this? Because you must deal with legacy organizations. Kellogg's a legacy organization, and dealing with emerging voices who want to speak for themselves.
Sure. So I would say the pivot is already happening. We see that folks are not going to traditional sources for their information. And one of the things that we do as part of our analysis around how do you change narrative is try to understand who are the trusted sources that communities are going to, where are they getting their information, how are they processing that information, what's the timeliness of the information, how rapidly does that information change. And that's where we've been putting our focus point around messaging to really help to elevate voice, to elevate story. We know that for many of the communities that we serve, the traditional media has not been the place where they felt the safest or the most trusted. And so that they use more localized communication mechanisms in order to be able to tell their story, be heard, and to also hear about other stories. And so for us, it's really around what partnerships need to happen both at the local level, the national level, that really can tell the lived experiences that folks are doing. Who are the people and the voices that genuinely reflect the stories of those communities, and then how can we support them either in their own endeavors and with or accelerators or sponsoring certain activities or certain events so that they have an opportunity to have a larger platform. And for us, we're agnostic of where the story is. We want the story to be real, true, and to really change hearts and minds. And that's how we've been approaching our work.
And also we need to find ways for the public to recognize or how to recognize a trust a source on mostly on social media. So we also need some kind of education for the public to know how to differentiate the difference between a journalist and, for example, an analyst, and someone who is just sharing comments or opinions in a blog. And so most of the time, people don't know how to recognize and differentiate those kind of sources, and there's a big issue, big problem that we still face a lot.
Do you mind if David touched on something that I wanted to get into, because this really affects underrepresented communities, and you spoke about AI, and we know that there is a kind of a toe in the water right now with news and what AI looks like. And I had a conversation with a corporation leader about that, and they said, look, there's going to be an effort, when we talk about budget, there's going to be an effort now to move into that area. And I said, so what concerns you about that? And they said, relevance. AI cannot introduce relevance in the way that a journalist in the field can introduce it. And most likely, when you take relevance out of a situation like that, you have those underserved communities are the ones that are most impacted. Those underserved communities are the ones who are left out, because those underserved communities are the more difficult ones to find that relevance, even now, using the tools that we have. It is going back to that jigsaw puzzle. It is oftentimes those underserved communities that are those pieces that it's difficult to put into place and to pull that, but it's worth the work to get in, because that completes the picture. That's one thing that I'm really concerned about as we go forward, and how we make sure that it doesn't step in and replace, and that it doesn't step in with the same biases that we see in the community that draws away from people of color and communities of color, and those people whose voices are best served in the healing process that we offer in journalism by adding that relevance to the piece.
Yeah, I will add to that. One of my concerns with AI is that most of the apps and platforms of AI doesn't share the sources of the information that they are giving to you. But we know that they use, for example, official survey statistics in their response. But what happens if that survey is biased and is full with information and data that doesn't represent people of color, or doesn't include people of color or LGBTQ+ communities in their results? So it's like you have a problem there with the AI. So we need to be very careful when we are integrating these kind of technologies and tools into Newsroom, and we have to fact-checking the results of information when using AI.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I worry about it. I think more and more these days about journalism as a business, and I worry about every one of our businesses when AI enters the picture, in part because cultural competency becomes the entire business. Relevance becomes the entire business. If companies are using AI to translate journalism that has already been produced, then what distinguishes you from what is generated by the AI? Why would I pay your organization if the AI is providing the same thing, quote unquote, for free? Well, then it can't be the same thing. What distinguishes it is the personality. What distinguishes it is the cultural competency to ask the right nuanced question, and to know the right person to ask, and to know that you don't go to the bank of people to ask questions that has been there for 100 years, because that bank has not been representative. And so it requires us to think even harder about how to lean into understanding what we haven't done in the past, because AI understands everything we've done in the past. So we have to be better in order to survive. So speaking in that space, it's funny, but in some way, even our organizations that are related to diversity are all legacy organizations now, right? NABJ is a legacy organization, it's been around forever. In LGJ and NAHJ as well. And that means that we have our own challenges in terms of intersectionality and making sure that we represent everyone in our community. I mean, Ken, I want to ask you about the challenge of NABJ as an organization interacting with the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, which is led by a black gay man, and the tensions that have arisen there, and with your own election and running against a trans member of NABJ. I want you to speak to your thoughts just generally about those races, but also regardless of your view or any perspective on those particular things, there's certainly a perception in the community, and therefore, how do you reach out when there are different opinions about what happened with both of those situations?
Yeah, and there's always a ton of work to do in everything in a situation like this. One of the things that I was proud to say is that when I was put in a leadership position at NABJ, it was Council of Presidents. And one of my first selections was my opponent, Tre'vell Anderson. And the interesting thing is when that came to me, someone says to me, there's this interesting person in LA who is on their game. They're wonderful, they're good at it, and they are gay, which was the term used then, they're gay. And I said, but are they gonna do work? And they said, yes. And I said, well, if they're gonna do work and they're coming with your recommendation, send that individual. I'd like that individual on. And Tre'vell has done an excellent job, did an excellent job in that position. As a matter of fact, when I had queries, I had things I had to do, I had recommendations, Tre'vell was one of those first up to do that. And I became chair of the Black Male Media Project, and I realized, God, we need a board. Like, we need a board bad, because doing this is difficult. The minute that I opened up, we moved from 3 to 11 fast. And I opened my eyes and I went, of this 11, 4 of them are LGBTQ+. But it is opening the door. And that's the challenge that you have to do, is it is opening the door to individuals and to processes, to people, and engagement and involvement. And that has been something that has been beneficial. The PABJ team and Ernest, thank you for mentioning, is here. Thank you guys for showing up. This is hometown for you guys, so that's good. There is a process there that we're working through, and we were very careful in working through that process and representation and what that looks like across the board. And that's one that is intricate. And one of those decisions that we wanted to make is how do you step into a position of representation? And the first thing you want to look for are those people. And going back to that same situation that brought my first appointment to me, is that someone said, this is a person who wants to step up and be in this space. And then you open the door to that. And when you open the door to that opportunity, you tend to get places. You tend to get engagement. You tend to get involvement. And that helps. But it is always remembering to open the door. And that's key.
I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions from the audience about what opening the door looks like. I'm wondering with NAHJ, in the past year, an LGBTQ task force was formed because members felt that there wasn't representation of those voices. And I'm wondering your thoughts on how that works and what NAHJ needs to do to be more inclusive.
Actually, the co-chair of that committee. So we have been working a lot during the last year to to fill that gap. And for example, during the last year with my with Luis Joel as a co-chair, we work on an update of LGBTQ plus style guide for Newsroom in Spanish, but also this organization translates to English, and in your bags you should have that style guide. We introduce more sessions and panels on our convention, but also during the year. And we have a team in place on the committee, just focus on attending LGBTQ plus community situations. And it's just it is okay to recognize when we have to do more work on a specific area, and we and also hear the voices of our members. And I'm a gay man, and I'm part of the NAHA board, and I recognize that we need to do more work in with the LGBTQ plus community, for example, and we address that as soon as possible when we put that on the table, and we have a big agenda for next year.
Yeah, so I'm not a spokesperson for NLGA anymore, but I'm an old head who knows the history of the organization. I mean, it's an organization that was formed by people who worked in mainstream media. And so there have been historic conversations about how do you include LGBTQ media, how do you give voice to LGBTQ media in this organization. And the history of this organization has been handing over the microphone, telling LGBTQ media that you create the programming for the convention. You do that work so that those voices are heard and it's not us stepping in the way. Whether it's the Trans Journalists Association creating panels, as they have throughout the convention this year. Whether it is Representative NABJ coming and saying there's not enough diversity in organization, and us saying, you create the panels, we will use our backing to put them on at the convention. Making sure that every single panel at this convention looks like this. Those are things that this organization has tried to do, and it's not enough. The work done even at this convention to change the emphasis of the name of the organization to better reflect our community. It's a constant work, as Carla was saying, and the key is to continue to listen and to continue to know that you have to continue doing that work.
And the only thing I would add is that do not make it the sole responsibility of those who are underrepresented. You need allyship. It impacts all of us. We all will benefit. We will all lose if we do not all participate. And so one of the things that I like to stress is that it is not my job as an individual to carry the burden for everything that's missing at the table. And so please, allyship is key.
Absolutely. We need some. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just remember that this interview that I made during the summer with LGBTQ plus leader in Puerto Rico, and one quote that he shared was that we need more allies out of the closet. So that quote became the title of the story. So yeah, we need more allies out of the closet.
Yeah. Part of the allies' work is to be more knowledgeable than they are and to be able to help with those questions. And part of the allies' role is to say, I'm gay, not trans. I can connect you to trans people who can help you answer this question. So both roles are key for allies. I need some allies in the audience. Who wants to ask questions? And where's our microphone?
Thank you. Hi, good morning. I'm Ernest Owens. I am a member of the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. This has been triggering, I have to be honest. As a Black queer journalist in Philadelphia, as a member of NABJ, I was banned from the organization, not given a due process to actually address a lot of the issues and concerns that were stacked up against me from the board that you currently serve on, Ken. And it's been devastating. It's been a microaggression. It's been harmful. The members of my board here in Philadelphia have held and stood by my side as a lot of these things have happened. And you talk about opening doors. We served as co-chairs on that Black Male Leadership Project. Travell was leading in LA before you used this metaphor of bringing them to the table. They faced misgendering by members of the national organization. I had faced homophobia by the national organization. And when I whistleblowed that on Twitter, and I shared those expressions on Twitter, and I was excluded from the organization without a due process, you did not speak to me. You did not call me. You had my number. You had my email. You say complicit. And a lot of people in this room who is members of this organization do not like the way that this is done. This is microaggressive to Black queer journalists and voices. Many of these people that sing at this table are from that community and also are members of NABJ. And the lack of communication, dialogue, direct interactions. You're talking about truth, racial healing, and transformation, but there's no accountability. There's no accountability. I had to get up this morning, accept this award, come here to see you face to face because you've avoided me, you've avoided Black queer journalists in Philadelphia, and I'm telling you, and I'm asking you now, enough with the Twitter, enough with the emails. Would you have a conversation with me about the decision that your organization did? One of the things that you all said in a memo to me was that one of the things that you said was a falsehood was when I shared my experience as a Black queer person running for the board. And it was met as a misinformation which led to my expulsion. But I was actually sharing my truth and my experience. And if that is considered a mistruth, how do you consider creating a safe space for Black queer journalists like myself and Travell, who's on that board, being misgendered and being disrespected? How do you, as a leader and a president, do something different than your predecessors? That is my question to you.
Ernest, I've always been open to you. You have my number? Do you have my number? Yeah. You can reach out to me. I think we've talked before. I think we actually shared a table last year at a Council of Presidents meeting. We were together with other individuals. That door is always open for us to discuss. And at this point, this is not the venue for me to talk about that issue. However, I just made a meeting with another colleague. If you want a meeting with me, I am more than welcome to that. I am open to the idea of talking with you. And I've got an 11 o'clock tomorrow. 1 o'clock tomorrow work with you? You can do 2 o'clock? Yeah. 2 o'clock works for me. 2 o'clock tomorrow, you and I will talk.
All right, we're scheduled. Any other questions?
Morning. My question is, how do we reconcile the conversation regarding what is diversity and what is not diversity? And my question is based upon my personal experiences of being in spaces where I'm the only person of color, but diversity is represented by a series of white cisgender men. And that is diversity. However, obviously, there's things that are missing. With the lack of resources, how do we collectively continue to push towards diversity and making sure that we're fully represented without turning into a crab in a barrel situation in which we're having some sort of oppression Olympics, deciding who's more oppressed, gays or blacks or NHA. You know, like no one said anything about the Asian American Journalists Association yet, right? And I only wonder, how do our Asian brothers and sisters feel about that? You know, so how do we, it's very easy to point out and say they. It's very hard for us to point in and say us. How do we get there?
One of the things that this is why we believe in having these conversations, because I think there isn't a single definition around diversity. It's really around people coming together and identifying what is the way in which they want to live, work, and experience each other. And I think what we've been encouraging is through our racial equity conversation guide is start the conversation, continue the conversation, because it's going to elevate blind spots that we all have around a variety of communities. And that's why, for us, the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, it's a process. It's bringing people together who've never been in rooms together to have really tough conversations. And we provide guidance and support and funding to help engage in these conversations, because it's critically important to start. And once you start, you develop what needs to happen, at least from the Kellogg Foundation perspective.
And commentary, of course, AAJA and representatives of the Indigenous Journalists Association were invited to the panel. So part of the key also is it isn't all done in one conversation, right? So.
And it is definitely hard to share like a specific definition. It's more like a multisectoral, multitasking, everything work. But from the NAHA perspective, for example, we believe in promote access to education. So, for example, that's an example. If we make sure that we are giving access to education to our members, it's a way to look into the future to have that diversity that we are looking for in our newsrooms. Because they are gonna be prepared to feel to do those different kind of work in the media outlets, and we all know that when we cover the stories about access to education in the communities, we know that people of color and Latino communities face so many obstacles to have fair access to education. So that's a way to promote diversity. And when we are covering the stories and looking for the different issues on the communities, be aware of the obstacles and injustice that those communities are facing, and make all that situation visible on the stories is also a way to promote diversity. I don't know if I'm just sharing the correct English words on my thought, but there's so many different ways to promote diversity, not just with a specific definition.
And I think one of the things I can relate to is I heard the frustration in your voice when you're trying to explain this. And I heard the frustration in your voice when you talk about, somebody has to do this story from the community and you're the only person of color sitting there and you go. The one thing that we can do, and there is no one solid answer that's gonna clear every hurdle in this, but talk about what it means to have the importance of having that inclusion, the importance of having us think about what it means to have that voice. We talk about healing, and I'm often fond of saying this, and if you know anything about me, is that in my household, I'm the person with the title, but the superstar is my fiance, and she was appointed by First Lady Rosalind Carter to their advisory board on mental health and journalism. And one of the things that they often talk about is what it means to use what we do as a healing process and including those voices. Because oftentimes what you have is you have people who feel like they're unheard. Nobody understands their opportunity, their community, their strife, their struggle. And it is reminding people that this is part of the fabric of our community, and this is necessary for us to tell those stories. And if we don't, then we miss the whole piece. We miss what that picture looks like for all of us. We miss those important pieces of that jigsaw puzzle that includes those elements that are going to make that picture whole, plain, visible, and have texture. And that texture is important. That texture is where the diversity lies. It really is. That's one way I can suggest.
All right. We'll do one more question, and I want to do a wrap-up question.
Hi. It was the 1970s, I think, when the News Leaders Association, which used to be ASNE, promised that media would reflect the US population. And they set a deadline, and then they pushed back the deadline, and they pushed back the deadline again. And in the most recent survey, it was 2018, 74% of newsrooms were white. Of the people who responded, who were willing to respond to the survey, which means it's probably much whiter than that, right? And they tried to do a survey every year. They canceled it because we get such low participation. What can the associations or anyone do to increase transparency even amongst these for-profit newsrooms? And I say for-profit because in the nonprofit space where I'm from, we do a survey every year. 95% of the hundreds of newsrooms respond, and we know that our number is reflective of the US population. So why is it not possible in for-profit newsrooms for this to happen?
So I don't work for the News Leaders Association. I know some friends who do and who worked on the survey. The News Leaders Association has also worked with NLGA on their revised surveys that they've tried to do, which do not try to do the same work that those previous surveys did because of participation. There are a couple of elements of the participation that were an issue. One is that it wasn't that some for-profit newsrooms weren't answering the questions. They weren't answering the questions in the specific way that that survey needed to have them answered. So for instance, if you go to the Washington Post website, they do a survey every year, and I don't know whether that survey meets the criteria of the News Leaders Association. Same with Gannett. Each of their papers does have a survey. It wouldn't have met the criteria that the News Leaders Association required. The issue is that our newsrooms aren't as diverse as they need to be. That includes nonprofit newsrooms and for-profit newsrooms. And what the associations can do to tackle that is have accountability and provide opportunity. We need to do a better job of being able to share the fact that you all need and are deserving of jobs with these mainstream newsrooms, and we need to do a better job of holding them accountable when they don't do the work.
And I can tell you that there's a lot of behind-the-scene work on the organizations, and we, for example, in the INAHA, we address directly media outlets and newspaper and TV stations. Every day. Almost. For example, we make a survey that we shared initial results on our convention on July about representation and investigative units on the United States. And we share the names of the media outlets that doesn't respond the survey. So we portray their names, and we make sure to continue asking them for complete the survey and share the information and be transparent, because we as a journalist and as media organizations, we ask for transparency for the people that we cover, and we need to practice that same transparency inside our workspaces and media, newsroom and organizations.
So one of the things that we also do, is we push at the top. Because we know that if you're more diverse at the top, you're typically more diverse at the bottom. And one of our toughest one is coming up with NFL media and Jim Trotter, who was just such a bold person stepping up and questioning Roger Goodell, and it is stepping in and providing support throughout that. But it's also calling out not just the bigger ones, but the smaller ones. Because sometimes within an organization, you find certain communities, certain newsrooms that tend to have traits and characteristics that survive far way too long. And it is going in, going after it, being aggressive, physically being in the newsroom. Literally, we had at least one where we went to the newsroom. We wanted a change of culture. And instead of saying we leave it up to the corporation to do that, I asked that the corporation leaders meet us in the newsroom so that we can show face and we can show that this is important for us, but being there side by side with them says this is important for them too. Being able to have people at the top who reflect, help, and in that situation, we had someone who was introduced as a Black news director in that position, and the staff across the board is browner than ever. That's one way that we can do that, but it's also just being very honest, being very forthright. And in addition to that, it is questioning coverage. We talked a little bit about that a little bit earlier. It's what happens to those stories that get pushed aside, that don't get told, that don't get reported. It is questioning folks on why they're not doing that when and where it is obvious that that is a story that needs to be covered and a community that is well underserved.
You can include this in your answer. The last question I wanted to ask was about 2024. There are going to be political, cultural forces, and even media forces that are going to be working to divide communities in 2024. What should we as media be doing to actually heal and create these conversations that are valuable to communities in this election year that is going to bring up racial issues?
So from my perspective and the narrative change work that we're doing, you have to call it out. When it happens, you have to call it out and you have to give the counter. And you have to do it every single time. And for us, as we think about 2024, we often hear between gun violence on sexual orientation and identity, around racial inequities, that, folks are resilient. Resiliency is not a badge of honor. And what we've been trying to get folks to understand is that accountability and change needs to happen. And the goal for us is to focus on what needs to change for children, to be very explicit around what needs to change for children, families, and communities, and to hold people accountable in making that change. And when they don't do it, calling them out so that everyone knows. Your success metrics must be clear around what the goal is that you want to accomplish. If you want to see more diversity in the newsroom, that needs to be part of the metrics that you look at every single day to say, how are we be accountable? How have we moved forward against this goal? And what still needs to happen? And until you do that, you will end up having piecemeal and talking in circles. But when you put the accountability and say, we will not succeed if this does not happen, it does change the narrative.
I think we just got a story assignment. Any other thoughts?
Well, you want to go first?
Can you repeat that question? I want to make sure I answer that.
2024, what should media be doing to make sure that these issues are framed in the way that they should be from the perspective of people in this room?
And some of it's going to be forced because some of what's going on in court surrounding one of the candidates is forcing us to look specifically at Georgia and the treatment of people in Georgia and how that's come out and how that's hurt and how that's caused fractions among the community. But the other thing is just making sure that we're focused on these issues. And that's the one thing that's usually the easiest pitch for us when we go into these newsrooms and we go into these editorial meetings and we talk about these stories is we have had 4 years of an opportunity as we walk into this to look at what now lack of diverse thinking does through COVID in health. There's so many numbers, so much information that's now out there that helps us to understand what this has done. Through education and COVID has helped us. And now through this push on in education to move away from the education that helps us understand our history better as it purports to Black people. It is being consistent when we step out with this. And the other thing that's really helpful is that the voice from the top, and that is the Trump and the MAGA movement, a lot of that, that has been a big pushback, and the anti-woke that has been a big pushback is a filter down. So no longer do you have to point up and say, let's do something on the national. You have a lot of people who are modeling on local races in school boards and in county commissioners and city council that give us an opportunity to really step in there and do point and counterpoint on how this impacts people and how shifting our thought and our engagement away from particular communities and particular issues impact those people who are voters and are powerful in this process now more than they ever have been.
And I think 2024 is key because we are now facing and living, I believe, a wave of hate around the nation, and we all know about the hundreds of legislations that are trying to reverse and reverse rights of the LGBTQ+ community that also affect people of color, and we need to force editorial decisions, and we need to make sure that we as a journalists are covering these stories from a human right perspective, because this is about human rights. And for example, when we are covering stories and production ask or an editor at us to include like the other side of the story or the other voice. What is gonna share the other voice? That hate in a quote, hate in an opinion, and so the space on newspapers and in media it's a privileged space, and we as a journalists are not supposed to be giving a space for hate in our stories. So we need to be clear on that in our newsroom and talk about that with our editors and leaders in the newsroom, and be clear on the editorial way that we are covering the story, particularly during the rest of the 2023 and 2024.
All right, I hate when people say thank you for your time. I instead say thank you to the audience for your questions and for your thoughts. I'm glad there's going to be a conversation here. Thank you to the panel for your analysis and for your expertise. And thank you all for waking up this morning and joining the conversation.
Okay, and as you guys are leaving, just don't forget, the panelists, they